Hello and welcome everyone to the Telerik DevCraft R1 2016 release webinar. We've got a lot of great things to show you in our latest release. My name is John Bristow and I'm part of the developer relations team at Telerik. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us here. And before we begin, I'd like to share with you a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube later today. So if you get pulled away and miss part of the webinar, don't worry. You'll be able to watch it again in high definition. Second, if you're experiencing any technical problems whatsoever during the webinar, please let us know through the Q&A panel and we'll help you out. Finally, since not everyone can be up at all hours, this webinar is being hosted twice to serve our global audience. Now, for today's webinar, I have my colleague Ed Charbonneau joining me to cover everything that's new in our R1 release for web developers. If you're building solutions with Telerik UI for ASP.NET Ajax or UI for ASP.NET MVC, then Ed will cover what you're looking for. I will be talking about what's new for developers targeting platforms like Windows, iOS, Android, and more. And of course, what would be a webinar without some cool prizes? If you submit a question during today's webinar, do make sure it's a good one because we will be giving away a Microsoft Surface 3 device to the best question that's asked. Also, we'll be giving out an Apple Watch to a lucky attendee simply by attending today's webinar. Please note that only attendees from the United States are eligible for these prizes. Our R1 release is packed with a whole host of features that we're going to cover during this webinar. Ed will kick things off talking about our web UI controls for ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Ajax. I will then cover the new innovations we've made to our mobile, desktop, and reporting capabilities as part of Telerik DevCraft itself. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague Ed, and he will walk you through some of the latest features we have in our web UI controls. Ed?
Thanks for the floor, John, and Happy New Year, everyone. It's hard to believe it's 2016 already. But we have a lot of awesome things to share in this release, and even more exciting things on the horizon. So let's kick things off with UI for ASP.NET MVC. Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC consists of 70 plus controls, all powered by our Kendo UI product. Kendo UI provides feature-rich UIs rendered with HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript that work seamlessly on any device with responsive and adaptive rendering. You also get full control over the user experience with robust client-side APIs. But with UI for ASP.NET MVC, you get more than that. You get server-side rendering using Razor helpers, which means you have full IntelliSense and Visual Studio scaffolding to boost productivity. So let's take a look at what's new. But first, since we're on the subject of ASP.NET, let's cover some breaking news. You might have heard that ASP.NET 5 is dead. So what exactly does that mean? This means that Microsoft has changed some of the naming conventions with the upcoming release of what we probably knew as vNext. ASP.NET 4.6 and the .NET Framework 4.6 will continue to be developed and remain Windows only, while .NET Core will be the new beginning for .NET as an open-source, cross-platform framework. We've been staying on top of these changes at Telerik, so we can make sure we have your back and support developers with the tools you need. Later on, I'll show some demos of what Telerik has coming for .NET Core. But first, let's talk about the new features added in this release of Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC. First, the spreadsheet that debuted as a beta in the last release is now official. We also have a new Excel filtering feature for the grid control. Brand new Visual Studio templates are coming as part of Service Pack 1 of this release. And just as promised, we'll take a look at the .NET Core support. First, I'm happy to announce the official release of our spreadsheet control. The new spreadsheet control provides the power of MS Excel right in the user's browser. Many of the features that you would expect from Excel are there, like formulas, functions, sorting, filtering, autofill, and much more. Even better, our control has robust client-side API that puts you in full control of the spreadsheet. Let's jump over to Visual Studio so we can see how a spreadsheet's created in MVC. So I have Visual Studio open because I want to show you how easy it is to get the new spreadsheet control integrated in your next project. Here I have a blank MVC application, and I have UI for ASP.NET MVC installed. What I'm going to do is add a simple Razor HTML helper, HTML Kendo spreadsheet, and I'm going to give it a name of my spreadsheet. And that's all that's required to add a spreadsheet to your page. I'm going to go ahead and save this and click Run. And how easy is that? I have a new spreadsheet control rendered right on my page for users to interact with. And even some of the more advanced features from Excel are there, like autofill. You can see I can enter January and February here and just highlight and drag them across to get all the months of the year. If you'd like to see additional demos of how to import, export, and save spreadsheet data to SQL, then stop by blogs.telerik.com after today's webinar. We'll be posting a recap which includes not only this webinar, but clips from our previous webinar, where we highlight these key features. Next, I want to highlight a brilliant feature that came from our spreadsheet control, but improves upon our world-class grid control. Now the Kendo grid control has an intuitive filter that you would find in MS Excel. This means you can offer your customers a user experience that they're already familiar with. Let's jump into a demo to see this in action. So I'm back in Visual Studio, but this time I have a different application open. This is a dashboard application that I've been building, and you can see I have a grid in this view. And the grid has multiple columns of data. And if we open up our browser, this is what the application looks like. I have a column called product name in this grid. And if I click on the filter icon, you can see I get a nice filter option here. But the type of filter that I have is a little more intuitive to developers than maybe it is to my users. So let's see if we can offer them a user interface that's a little more familiar to them, like the one that we have in Excel. So I'm going to go back into this view that I have, and I'm going to add a new filtering option to my product name column. And you can see I've set filterable equal to multi and search equal to true. So if I save this page and go back to the application and refresh, and I go over to my product name filter and click on it, you can see I'm presented with all of the data that is in that column, and I can easily click on these checkboxes. I can select tofu and chai and hit filter, and now I have that data filtered out. So this is very simple stuff that is just like you would get in MS Excel, and we can present that to the user just by changing a couple properties on our column. Now let's shift our attention to what the future of UI for ASP.NET MVC looks like. We're talking about applications that work on any screen size and any client, but also work on any server. With .NET Core, you can write ASP.NET MVC apps that can run anywhere. And Telerik wants to make sure that you're supported no matter where you develop, deploy, or run your application. UI for MVC already works with ASP.NET 4.6, but in addition, we also support ASP.NET Core. So let me pull up my Ubuntu machine and show you how UI for ASP.NET MVC looks like in my development environment there. So here I have my Ubuntu desktop open, and I'm going to come over here and click on Visual Studio Code. And if you're not familiar, Visual Studio Code is a Microsoft editor that's open source and cross-platform. And I have a project open in here, and you can see there's models, views, controllers. So this is an MVC 6 application that is written on top of ASP.NET Core. And if I go to my index page, you can see Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC, and I'm using some of the Razor helpers. So I'm going to go ahead and run this application. And I'm going to click on the root directory and hit open in terminal. And to start the web server on Ubuntu, I'm just going to type in dnx web. And you can see the application is started up, and all I need to do is navigate over to that URL. And I'm going to come into Firefox and type localhost. So you can see the demo page is loaded, and I have my Kendo UI controls on the page. And if I scroll down, you can even see I have a grid control here with filtering enabled and paging. And this shows that we have support for ASP.NET MVC6 cross-platform running on Ubuntu. How cool is that? So once again, we're going to be recapping the webinar on blogs.telerik.com, and we'll make sure to add a link to our GitHub repository so you can download the MVC6 application I just showed and run it on your own Mac or Linux box. And on a final note, before we move on, I wanted to mention that tag helpers for ASP.NET MVC6 are in development. Tag helpers are a new Razor feature in MVC6 that makes server-side development even easier. If you'd like to learn more about tag helpers and what's coming in ASP.NET MVC6, then stop by developer.telerik.com and get the free white paper ASP.NET MVC6 Changes Every Developer Should Know. Let's move on to Kendo UI. Kendo UI is the underlying framework of UI for MVC, with over 70 HTML, CSS, and JavaScript controls, data source components, and support for your favorite JavaScript libraries like Angular. Kendo UI is more than capable to handle any front-end development task. Before we get started, did you know that Kendo UI Professional is included in your DevCraft license? As a developer advocate, I get to talk to a lot of customers, and many aren't taking advantage of this because they simply don't know they had it. If you have a DevCraft account, be sure to check your Telerik control panel or Telerik account for the Kendo UI installer. With this release, the spreadsheet control comes out of beta. Also keep your eye out for new app templates that are coming in Service Pack 1 of this release. We're also expanding our Angular support with a brand new Angular 1 dashboard demo application and ongoing effort to support Angular 2 and more. If you'd like to see in-depth demos of the new Kendo UI features, then mark your calendars for February 17th for a full Kendo UI webinar. It's time for UI for ASP.NET Ajax. Our ASP.NET Web Forms control suite comes packed with over 80 controls, all of which put you in control with robust server-side and client-side APIs. Let's begin by talking about modern web development. Today's web developers are searching for a framework to make web development easier. They want component-based web development, where complex HTML structures can be defined by a single element. They want semantic HTML5 with CSS3 for low bandwidth, and they want it customizable. They want desktop-like performance with little or no browser refreshes. And what today's web developers want, you already have. And while others are busy searching, you're busy building with ASP.NET Web Forms and Telerik UI for ASP.NET Ajax. We have a packed release for ASP.NET Ajax. Our new spreadsheet control that is available for Kendo UI and MVC is also available for Web Forms. We've added a new material design theme to make your apps look clean and modern. New inputs, buttons, and more have been added to improve the scope of Telerik controls that are available in your toolbox. And we've also created a brand new webmail application that we'll show you later. Also in this release, lightweight rendering is 100% complete. A new responsive toolbar has been added, and charts now have the ability to pan and zoom. Also, a new theme builder was released to help you customize your app's appearance. Let's begin with the powerful new spreadsheet control that comes out of beta in this release. The spreadsheet brings a true Excel experience to your web applications by letting you apply formulas and use Excel-like navigation, format cells, and import and export data. The spreadsheet control for Ajax uses a convenient spreadsheet document provider to load and save spreadsheet data. Let's open Visual Studio and take a look at how to set this up. So here I have an empty ASP.NET 4.6 Web Forms application. And to add a RAD spreadsheet to this blank page, I'm just going to go over to my toolbox and drag and drop the RAD spreadsheet control onto the page. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit run. And as simple as that, I've gone from a blank page to having a fully functional RAD spreadsheet control on the page. Notice the toolbar at the top of the spreadsheet that has many of the same features as Microsoft Excel, like bold, italic. We can control font size, coloring, merge cells, and more. And another interesting feature with the toolbar is if I shrink the screen size down, notice the toolbar is responsive, and any toolbar action that can't fit in the toolbar space gets rolled up under this nice drop-down menu. This type of toolbar control is actually available in this release as well as a standalone control. So I'm going to expand this back out so we can focus on this save icon. So far we haven't implemented any way to save the spreadsheet, so let's go back into Visual Studio and hook that up. So saving and loading from a RAD spreadsheet is a relatively easy process. What I'm going to do is jump into the code for this page, and I'm going to paste in the code so you don't have to watch me type. So what I'm going to do is create a brand new spreadsheet document provider, and I'm going to give it the path to a spreadsheet that already exists on my server. What that's going to do is when the page loads, that spreadsheet's going to be available for the user to edit. Then when the user clicks save, the spreadsheet document provider will do all the work necessary to save the data back to the spreadsheet. So I'm going to run the application again. And when the app loads in the browser, you'll notice it pulls a spreadsheet from my server and preloads that data for the user to edit. Now I can make changes here to the spreadsheet, and when I hit save, they'll persist back. So I can, for example, change this column's color. Let's grab a nice shade of blue, and then I'll go back and hit the save button and reload the page. And notice that data's been persisted back to the file that's on the server. If you'd like to see additional demos of how to use document processing to build a spreadsheet using SQL data, then stop by blogs.telerik.com after today's webinar. We'll be posting a recap which includes not only this webinar, but clips from our previous webinar where we highlight these key features. Next, we'll look at our new material design theme using some of the new controls available in this release. You can now leverage the new label, checkbox, push button, link button, and toggle button. These controls have many advantages over the ASP.NET Toolbox controls provided by Microsoft, allowing you to build complete forms with Telerik UI controls. Let's jump into Visual Studio and see how they all work together. In this demo, I'll show how using Telerik UI makes theming your application easy. On the page, I have one of my favorite controls, the RAD Wizard. Inside the RAD Wizard are many form controls, including the RAD label, text box, and toggle button. Let's run the application in the browser and see how it works. This is what the application looks like in the browser using the Bootstrap theme. Notice the label, text box, checkbox, push button, and date picker controls all have the same look and feel. This even includes things like the drop-down box. I'm going to move through the application and start it again, but this time I'll be using the brand new material design theme. Notice how all the controls comply to the new theme. Again, the label, text box, checkbox, push button, and date picker controls all have the material design theme applied. All this can be done using one variable in your web config file or using the configure project dialog from your Telerik UI menu in Visual Studio. Here's what the two themes look like side by side. Let's hop back over to the demo to see how the RAD toggle button is implemented. On this page, you can see there's a terms and agreement that has a show more button. When you click the show more, the terms and agreements text is shown. If you click show less, it's hidden. Let's go over to the code and see how this works. In the markup, you'll notice I have a RAD toggle button. The RAD toggle button has a property called onClient toggle state changed, and that points to a function called toggle terms. We also have our toggle states defined here. We have two buttons, show more and show less, with the default selected. When the client clicks the toggle button, the on-client toggle state changed event is triggered. This executes a piece of JavaScript that will hide or show our extended terms. Let's see what the JavaScript looks like in our JS file. You can see the function toggle terms, and we're simply doing a jQuery selector and then calling the toggle function on the object. This just toggles the CSS to visible or hidden. Over the past few releases, we have been implementing an entire new rendering mode for Ajax. With today's release, this long journey is over, and you can now benefit from 100% lightweight controls. This means the entire UI toolbox is using semantic HTML5, CSS, and modern web best practices to produce the lightest and most performant apps yet. Enabling lightweight rendering in your current projects is as easy as setting the render mode to lightweight in your web config. The new theme builder for ASP.NET Ajax is now officially released. The theme builder provides an intuitive user experience, so any developer can jump in and begin customizing the look of your application, no design skills required. Let's open up the new theme builder and take a quick tour. The new theme builder is easily accessible from themebuilder.telerik.com on the web. From here, we can create or import an existing theme. I'll select Create. For this demo, I'll just choose Webinar and select Bootstrap as my default theme. From here, I'll just select all of the controls that I want to style and hit Create. From here, I can modify any of the existing Bootstrap theme colors. Let's take the background color of the selected item in the grid, for example. I'll just scroll down to Selected Background, and let's give this a nice Telerik green color. Notice the UI updates, and once it does, I can download this new theme and import it into my project. Just stop by themebuilder.telerik.com after the webinar to give the new theme builder a try. We've launched a brand new webmail demo with this release. The webmail demo shares our vision of what a modern ASP.NET Web Forms app can look like. The webmail app combines function and style, and the full source code is available for you to use as a starter on your next application, or just learn how many of the UI controls can work together to create a seamless user experience. Let's walk through where to find the demos and get the source code. If you visit demos.telerik.com, you can see demos for many of our products, including ASP.NET Ajax, MVC, and Kendo UI. I'm going to launch the ASP.NET Ajax demos. On this menu, you can see that we have demos for individual controls, and on the right-hand side, we have some sample applications. I'm going to open the new Outlook-inspired application. The new webmail demo shows you how to create master detail views like this one, or use the RAD scheduler control to create and edit appointments like these. And to get the full source code, just click Download from the menu above. Let's take a quick review of what I've covered. UI for ASP.NET MVC, Ajax, and Kendo UI all got the brand new spreadsheet control. UI for ASP.NET MVC got Excel-like filtering for grids. New Visual Studio templates are coming in Service Pack 1. ASP.NET Core support is here, and MVC6 tag helpers are on their way. UI for ASP.NET Ajax got a new material design theme, semantic rendering, new inputs and buttons, an all-new sample mail app, and much, much more. And just as a reminder, there'll be a full webinar to cover all the new things that come in Kendo UI. Here's some resources that'll get you up to speed after the webinar. Thanks, everybody, and John, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. That was great. I really dig that spreadsheet control. It's going to make the lives of so many developers that much better. And don't forget to sign up for that webinar that we have coming up around Kendo UI itself. A lot of great stuff that's going to be shown off there. All right, so we're going to show you some of the new things that we have available in our mobile UI, desktop UI, and reporting capabilities of Telerik DevCraft. And to begin, what better place to start than talking about building apps for iOS with Telerik UI for iOS. Our library of UI controls for iOS has come a long way since we first shipped it as a beta back in January 2014. Today, it features a wide range of controls for visualizing data, data binding, displaying menus, submitting feedback from your users, and much more. In our latest release of Telerik UI for iOS, the autocomplete text view is now official. This is a control that helps users fill out entry forms faster by displaying a list of best matches based on your user's input. We've also made a number of improvements to the data form, our data-oriented control and framework for building forms. The data form now offers the option to load all property annotations from JSON. In addition, it comes with a multi-line text editor and an autocomplete text editor. Let's take a look at the latest features now available in Telerik UI for iOS. Here I have a running application on my iOS simulator that shows our new autocomplete text view. For simplicity, let's examine how it works by default. When I type a letter into the autocomplete text view, I'm presented with a list of countries to choose from. Pretty simple. Tapping the Options menu shows me a list of customizations that I can select from to configure the autocomplete text view. By default, it will search within strings to find matches. However, you can override this behavior by setting the completion mode to the Starts With option. Additionally, I can override the way suggestions are displayed by changing the Suggest mode of the autocomplete text view. Let's switch this to Append and see what happens. Notice that when I begin entering a country, I am then shown the text inline. Let's switch over to Xcode to see how this works. Notice that I have an instance of a TK data source available. This will ultimately bind to a list of countries in an embedded JSON file. I also have a TK autocomplete text view, which is our new control for Telerik UI for iOS. Binding the data to the TK data source is easy. I simply initialize it from the JSON resource you see here. Once it's loaded, I bind the TK autocomplete text view by setting its data source property to the TK data source here. There are APIs to override the completion mode and suggestion modes, which we are driving through options. Let's take this one step further. The autocomplete text view can be used in conjunction with other controls to provide a custom select mode. In this example, we're using a TK list view to display a collection of people in my organization. When I start to enter data into the autocomplete text view, the list view is updated accordingly. Jumping over to Xcode, you can see my view is displayed through the TK list view I have here. Updating that view to reflect the data I've entered into the autocomplete text view is a simple matter of defining a delegate. It's important to note that you can also bind data from remote resources to drive the behavior of the autocomplete text view as well. Let's talk about building apps for Android with Telerik UI for Android. Much like our controls for iOS, our UI control library for Android has grown and improved a great deal since our first beta back in February 2014. These controls include ones for visualizing data, displaying menus, binding data to controls, and more. This release features improvements to the list view and data form. With the list view, we've added the ability to collapse groups. With the data form, email, phone, and password editors have been added, giving users better entry form fields when submitting data. We've also added validator and editor parameters to annotations. This allows you to have better control over how they are emitted through the data form to the user. And finally, we've added the ability to edit JSON objects and to set editor properties through JSON schema. Let's take a look at the latest features now available in Telerik UI for Android. Here we are in my environment where I have Android Studio running a version of an application that we've built using the various controls we have now in UI for Android. And in this demo, what I'd like to highlight are how you get a data form up and running using these capabilities. This is a reservations application that allows me to reserve tables for various folks. And this is built on the data form component that we have built into UI for Android. So I can go ahead and create new reservations. And all of this data that you see here is actually coming from a class description that's been annotated with information to give information to the data form in order to do things like validation and other sorts of operations. So I can go ahead and specify various details here. So my colleague TJ will go ahead and reserve a table. Very sort of canonical phone number here, today's date and time, etc. And then I can specify various other factors. If I had gotten one of these things wrong, we would see a validation occurring against this, saying that, selected date must be a future date, for example, like the 5th. As an example here. So when these things are in place, these are actually being enacted upon by a class that you have, which we'll see in a second. That's really how we're operating against the data form itself. So jumping back over into the code here, you can see that we have a class declaration here called a reservation, and this extends the class called notify property change base, which is basically a way of actually getting notifications of change events for data binding. On here, you can see we have a variety of simple methods that are defined for things like the reservation date, the name, etc. And these have been annotated with data form properties. These are basically the way in which we'll specify things like validators, the layout, and other sorts of objects as well. So with this defined, we can actually go ahead and start defining all sorts of properties on our class and then setting values against them. In addition to that, the way that this is all hanging together is through the data form itself. So by instantiating this data form and utilizing it for edit commands and other types of commands as well, you can actually set these things up and simply point the data form at those classes and then have them immediately generate the UI that you saw previously in that example. And so in the case of what we're doing here, this turns out to be immensely powerful. So in the case of UI for Android, we actually have new editors that are now available specifically for the email, phone, and password editors. And so that gives you a lot more control over the types of values that you wish to pass in. And as I said before, we've added validator and editor parameters to annotations. So I can specify those on the class declaration that you saw earlier here. So those are new and available now to you for Android based apps using our UI for Android framework. Let's talk about building apps with Xamarin and Telerik UI for Xamarin. Xamarin provides a platform for enabling developers to build native apps for iOS, Android, macOS, and Windows using C# and Visual Studio. Telerik has provided a robust suite of UI controls for Xamarin for over a year now. In our latest release, we've improved the number of our key controls, including the data form, side drawer, list view, and chart controls. We packed a lot of great new features and improvements into the data form. Xamarin Forms now features new date range and numerical range properties as well as support for read-only mode. We've also added time editor, decimal editor, and integer editor types, as well as positive and negative feedback images and messages. New editors are available for email, phone, and password inputs. The side drawer extends the popular slide-out design pattern, which is mainly associated with navigation. With this control, you can embed any content inside the sliding panel, from text to icons to sliders and filters. In the latest release of UI for Xamarin, we've extended the side drawer for Xamarin Forms to support Windows Universal 8.1. Additionally, the side drawer for iOS now supports centering the side drawer item image along with any text. The list view is one of our most popular controls. It's highly flexible and offers a wide range of features, including item management, pull to refresh, UI virtualization, and more. Let's talk about Telerik UI for WPF. As you may know, Telerik UI for WPF is one of the most extensive libraries of WPF controls on the planet, featuring over 100 controls that cover data management and visualization, scheduling, editing, layout, and more. In our latest release, we've added some significant features and improvements to a few of our most popular controls. Starting off, we have a brand new control called the Time Span Picker. This control originally shipped as a beta in the previous release, and today we're making it an official part of the UI for WPF library. The time span picker is useful in situations when you want your users to select a time span value. It's great for using in apps that need to schedule appointments or create calendar entries. Next up is a new API that helps you introduce custom touch gestures into your application and enhance the touch support in your WPF apps. It's called the Touch Manager, and it's a tool that we've been using internally for a while. We've simply decided to make it public. We realize that if we find it so useful, then you might find it useful too. The Touch Manager provides a simple yet effective way to respond to touch events like swiping and pinching. You can also attach event handlers for basic sort of things like touch enter, touch move, touch leave, etc. The Touch Manager uses these to recognize certain gestures. And there are a number of predefined gestures like tap, swipe, pinch, and so on. Included in the Touch Manager is the Gesture Manager, which supports custom gestures like a two-finger swipe. Now, as you know, UI for WPF comes with a ton of built-in themes that give your app a polished look and feel. Our newest green theme looks really nice. It's a flat theme with a green accent that comes with customizable rounded corners and in two variations, dark and light. The grid view is one of our most popular controls in UI for WPF. In this release, we've integrated full text search into the grid view itself. A lot of customers had requested this feature. With it, you'll be able to perform search queries against the bound data source to filter the data that's being displayed. The grid view will also highlight any matches that are found. It's really nice. And finally, we've added some incremental improvements to other controls in UI for WPF. For example, you can now repeat the table header row for the rich text box. The tile list now allows you to select multiple items at once. We've also added the ability for you to add start and end times on a day in the time ruler of the timeline view. Let's take a look at some of these new features and improvements in action. Here I am in my environment, and if we navigate over to Visual Studio, let's take a look at an example of the new time span picker that is now available as part of UI for WPF. Let's go ahead and run this application. And what you see here is a grid view with some data that's been bound to it. In the column here that you see called duration, you can see we have some time spans that are listed. In fact, if I go into one of these and I double click, I can go ahead and modify this value. You can see that we have this new time span picker, which allows me to select days, hours, minutes, and seconds. You can control this using the XAML that you declare for your view. This is a really nice feature because it allows you to not only utilize that, but also within the filter itself for the grid view. So here the grid view is actually propagating that duration, and I can go ahead and filter against it. Looking at the code for this, you can see that in the underlying XAML, we actually have our rad time span picker listed here in our XAML. And you can see that we can list the various components for us to use within that UI. You can control this right down to the minute detail if you wish. And the reason why this is useful is because it obviously gives users more control. Looking at the grid view now, we also have the ability to do full text search. So if we go ahead and run this application now, you can see I have an application that just lists a bunch of players, their number, and the countries that they play for. The full text search here is listed, and I can go ahead and conduct a variety of searches here. So I can start typing, and you'll notice that when I type, I'm not getting an immediate feedback. And the reason why that is because I have this option here selected called Is Searching Deferred, which basically means you have to submit it before it's actually conducted. This is useful if you're conducting queries against a remote data store. So if I go ahead and hit enter, you'll notice that we get criteria back saying that these are people who play for England or match EN in their name. Let's go ahead and disable this now and see what happens when we go ahead and type. So if I start typing now, you'll notice that I get some immediate feedback. And so there's a lot of usefulness in terms of this feature. The other thing that's nice about this, it also supports a variety of operations. So I can go ahead and type, say, for example, England. And if I wish, I can go ahead and remove people from that set, for example. So I can say minus Wayne Rooney, and you'll notice that he's removed. I can also add plus if I wanted to add additional criteria or other things like that if I wanted to, and get those result sets back accordingly. So the full text search enabled here is actually quite nice and gives you some really powerful capabilities built into the grid view now going forward. Let's take a look at how this works inside of Visual Studio. So inside of Visual Studio, you'll notice that we have this Boolean option on the rad grid view says show search panel equals true. By specifying that value, you can now get this full text search integrated directly into the grid view. Additionally, I can also specify another value, which is bound here to a checkbox, which is for the deferred option if I wish. So that option there really lights up the grid view and gives me automatic searching against any data bound or data source to the grid view itself. And finally, we also have some new themes, as I mentioned earlier. So we have a number of built-in themes that you can go ahead and exploit for the various controls you have on your page. The new ones that we include now with the latest release include green light, which is this one here, or green dark. Let's talk about targeting Windows 10 through the Universal Windows platform. The introduction of Windows 10 brought with it the ability for developers to create apps that spanned multiple form factors. This architecture, known as the Universal Windows Platform, or UWP, offers the potential to run apps on any Windows-based device, including phones, tablets, laptops, and even compact devices such as wearables. The good news is that Windows 10 is seeing quite a healthy rate of adoption. According to Net Market Share, 10% of desktops worldwide are running Microsoft's latest and greatest operating system. That's not too bad when you consider that Windows 10 shipped about 6 months ago. Now, as you may know, we introduced our UI controls for UWP in September of last year as a CTP. Today, I'm happy to announce the official release of Telerik UI for UWP. This release features over 20 UI controls for you to use to build UWP apps for Windows-based devices. These include controls to create rich data visualizations through charts, gauges, and graphs, a list view to group, sort, and filter data, the powerful data form component to quickly create data-driven apps, a map control with extensive layer support, and a whole slew of input controls with custom actions and built-in validation. In this release, we've added a new grid control that's been optimized for tablets and desktops. It's currently in beta, but I'd encourage you to check it out. Grids are great for displaying large amounts of data in a tight area. They provide a range of functions like sorting, filtering, and grouping to help your users get a better idea of the data they're looking at. We'll be adding support for phones in the next release of UI for UWP. Let's take a look at a few of the controls that are available in UI for UWP. To kick things off, I thought I'd start by showing an example of a sales dashboard that we created for UWP. On the left, you can see our sales dashboard running within the confines of the simulator. This is the one that's provided for Visual Studio and is useful for testing a variety of screen sizes and form factors. So for example, I can go from one size to the next, and you can see the result of that change occurring here. On the right, I have an emulated version of the Windows Phone 10 device. This is running one of the later builds, and as you can see, we actually are using the exact same code running on UWP, and as you can see, we have things like rotation, we can interact with this if we wish, and a whole variety of other operations can be conducted. The nice thing about this, of course, is the fact that we actually have code sharing, which is key and critical to, obviously, the success of UWP. Now, there are a variety of controls that we can take a look at, but I think fundamentally speaking, this is the critical aspect, the ability to run the code in two different places at the same time, for example. It turns out to be really nice. You can actually utilize this code effectively and code share across any Windows-based device that now supports UWP. So if we take a look at some of the example controls that we have, we can bring up our toolbox, obviously in the context of a XAML file. So we'll just bring up the main page.xaml, for example. And if we take a look at the toolbox here for the controls that are available as part of Telerik UI for UWP, there's a wide variety of ones available to you. The ones that you saw earlier were ones created for using, obviously, the chart, but you can see there's a whole variety of ones that you can use here, including things like using ones for a map, if you wish. There's a hub tile control that we have as well. Side drawer, which is very effective for, obviously, hiding menu contents if you're confined in a page size, for example. Things like date pickers, calendars, etc. So you have a wide variety of these controls available at your disposal, and it turns out to be really nice because obviously being able to code share across any Windows device gives you a lot of portability and flexibility going forward. One of the better ones that are worth noting, obviously, is the RAD data grid. This is a really good control for obviously sharing or displaying a lot of data on a screen, and really should be considered when utilizing UWP as the target framework for your apps running, obviously, on Windows devices. So lots of great stuff worth looking at, and it makes me incredibly excited to obviously announce the fact that this is now an official framework for you to use as part of Telerik DevCraft. And finally, let's talk about reporting. Reporting has become a strategic asset for organizations because it provides insights about your data. However, as the size and volume of your reporting infrastructure grows, reporting itself can become a burden for your IT departments. Telerik Report Server gives you control over your reporting through its ability to schedule, store, manage, and view reports, all from a single web interface. In the latest release of Telerik Report Server, we've added a bunch of great new features. One of the most requested features we got from customers was to support report parameters for scheduled tasks. Now, with Telerik Report Server, you can set these parameters in order to filter the data before the report is calculated. With this feature, different people in your company can receive auto-generated offline reports based on the specific data they need. Another new feature of Telerik Report Server is the ability to define custom templates for the emails that are sent out for these auto-generated reports. These templates can use a series of parameters to customize them. We've also now included a built-in guest account with read-only permissions for reports. This is a great feature to use when you want to simplify how your reports are accessed. When the guest account is enabled, guest users can browse reports from the allowed category or by URL without the need to have a report server user account. And finally, all web-based report viewers for Telerik reporting can now display reports that are stored by Telerik Report Server. Users can now view reports directly in the applications they use daily without the need to be a registered report server user or to launch the report server web interface. Whew. Well, I don't know about you, but that's a whole heck of a lot of stuff that we've packed into this latest release of Telerik DevCraft, and we've only scratched the surface. We didn't have enough time to show you everything. There's a whole host of other features that we didn't even get to show you, but the best part of it is that you're going to be able to check this out yourself, being an existing customer. So do check out those demos, do download the latest trials, check out the latest examples we have built. They are there to help you get started. And with that, we are near the end of our webinar, but like every webinar we conduct at Telerik, we always make sure that we have some time for some Q&A at the end. So myself and Ed will be sticking around here for the next few minutes answering your questions. So jump on that Q&A panel, submit a question. Don't forget that you're up for grabs for a Microsoft Surface 3 device if you live in the United States, and we'll endeavor our best to try and answer all the questions we can. In the meantime, if you have to jump off, thanks a lot for attending. We really appreciate the time you've taken to join us here today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Take care.